Blood stained the concrete floor like crimson paint that would never wash away. Wild screams echoed across the yard, mingling with the sickening crunch of bones as flesh was torn apart. Kelvin, a 17-year-old black man with scars on his arms, like an autobiography of violence, was strangling Willie with his hands. Willie, a 16-year-old Latino whose baby face was obscured by eyes aged with hatred, was clawing at Kelvin in desperation. "You killed my brother! I'll kill you!" Kelvin roared, his voice hoarse with pain. Willie screamed, a hoarse Spanish curse, followed by a knee to Kelvin's ribs. Around them, the other prisoners formed a circle like hungry wolves, their eyes bright with the thrill of violence. Sean Porter rushed into the chaos. He'd been working at Kilpatrick Juvenile Detention Center for 3 years, but scenes like this still made his stomach churn. "Stop!" Sean roared, his voice like a knife cutting through the chaos. He grabbed Kelvin by the shoulders and pulled him back, while another guard pulled Willie to safety. In that terrible moment of silence, Sean looked into their eyes and saw something that sent a chill down his spine. They weren't kids anymore. They were dead souls inside. Sean turned his gaze to the empty yard behind the detention center. Suddenly, a crazy idea flashed through his mind like lightning in a storm. Kilpatrick Juvenile Detention Center is no place for fallen angels. It is where society sends children whose parents have completely abandoned them. Nestled in the harsh, arid landscape of California, it is an oasis from the outside world, where communities dump their most troubled kids and try to forget they ever existed. Sean Porter walks down the hallway in his worn, white sneakers, the last vestige of his college football days, when he still believed the world could be fair. At 35, the man is not the typical image of a juvenile detention officer. He is too friendly with criminals, too optimistic about kids society has labeled hopeless. "Good morning, Sean." Malcolm Moore calls from his office, waving at his neatly pressed light blue dress shirt. Malcolm, Sean's black co-worker, was the only one in the facility who believed these kids could still be saved. They'd worked together for 2 years, and Malcolm was more than just a co-worker, he was a brother in arms. In the yard, Willie Weathers sat alone on a bench, his orange prison uniform pale against the harsh California sun. At 16, Willie carried the wariness of someone who'd seen too much death on the streets of East Los Angeles. He'd joined a gang at 12, not because he wanted to, but because survival demanded it. In the corner of the yard, Kelvin Owens was lifting weights, his tall, muscular frame casting a long shadow on the concrete. At 17, he had the body of a linebacker, but it was his eyes that made other inmates retreat. Those dark eyes were always alert, always ready, like a wild animal that had learned the hard way that trust was a luxury it could not afford. Unlike other detention centers, Kilpatrick housed kids who had done things adults could not imagine. Drug dealers, gang members, some even committed murder. They came from different ghettos across Los Angeles, carrying hatred and racial prejudice like deadly weapons. Sean watched these boys every day, saw how they separated themselves by skin color. On one side were black kids, on the other Latinos, creating a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. The statistics hanging behind Sean's desk were a grim reminder of their failure. 75% of juveniles released from detention centers reoffended within 3 years. For the kids at Kilpatrick, that number is even higher. These are not just numbers on a page. They are futures destroyed, families torn apart, and communities poisoned by a seemingly unbreakable cycle. That evening, Sean stood by his office window, staring out at the vast, empty field behind the facility. The space was quiet and desolate, like a blank page waiting for someone to write a new story. When Malcolm asked him what he was thinking, Sean responded with the words that would change everything. "I think maybe it's time these kids learned to stand for something, instead of against everything." The report on Sean's desk read like a death certificate written in bureaucratic language. Jerome Washington, 17, released 3 months ago, died of a gang shooting. Marcus Rivera, 16, was arrested for drug trafficking just 2 months after his release. Danny Cruz never even made it home, shot dead at a bus stop before his family could greet him. "We're failing," Sean told Malcolm, his voice shaking with anger. "We're not a rehab center. We're just a stopover on the way to jail or the morgue." Malcolm slumped down, his brown suit jacket crumpled with exhaustion. "I want to start a football team." The silence that filled the room was deafening. Malcolm stared at Sean as if his friend had just announced he wanted to fly to the moon. "Sean, please tell me you're kidding. I've never been so serious in my life." Sean replied, slamming his fist on the table. "These kids need something to fight for. Football will teach them all that." The meeting with the facility's board of directors was like a courtroom. Director Ted Dexter, a 55-year-old with silver hair and cold eyes, sat at the head of the table like a judge about to hand down a death sentence. "Porter, do you know what you're proposing? This is juvenile delinquency, not a place to train gifted students. Do you think they can play together without killing each other?" "That's why we have to try." Sean stood up, his black polo shirt making him look more serious than ever. "If we don't do something different, we're going to keep seeing the deaths of Jerome, Marcus, Danny." Sean prepared for this battle like a general planning a war. "I'll pay for the equipment. I'll take full responsibility for any injuries, and I'll coach them myself." A week later, Sean stood in the middle of the field with a whistle around his neck and a worn old football in his hand. "Who wants to play football?" Laughter rang out from every corner of the field. Willie Weathers, his bright orange shirt making him look like a traffic cone, shouted back, "Old man, are you crazy?" Kelvin Owens stood in the corner, arms crossed. "I don't play with Mexicans. And I don't play with any black boys," Willie replied, his tone venomous. Sean blew his whistle louder. "On this field, you're not Latinos, you're not blacks, you're not whites, you're Mustangs. Either you keep killing each other in prison, or you learn to fight together on this field. Why should we trust you?" Carlos Mendez, a 16-year-old with a scarred face that told stories no child should ever have to live through, asked, "You're just like all the other adults, making promises you can't keep." Sean slammed the ball down on the ground, watching it bounce back into his hands. "Because I've been there. I know what it feels like when the world gives up on you before you can prove yourself." "Bullshit." Kelvin stepped forward, his dark eyes blazing with anger. "You're white. You don't know anything about our lives." "I know Jerome Washington is dead. I know Marcus Rivera is in jail. And I know if you keep going down this path, you'll be next on the death row." Sean's words were like bullets, each name a reminder of friends who would never come home. In the end, 7 boys signed up. Not because they trusted Sean, but because they had nothing left to lose. That night, Sean received a call from Director Dexter. "Porter, if there is any accident, injury, or any incident, you will be fired immediately. And I hope that happened soon." The first practice was a battlefield. Everything was chaos. Sean stood in the middle of the field, drenched in sweat after only 10 minutes, while the 7 boys huddled in separate groups, like 2 opposing armies preparing for battle. "Listen," Sean blew his whistle. "Rule number 1. On this field, you're a team. Off the field, you can hate each other all you want, but here, you live and die together." Willie Weathers, in his dirty white t-shirt, spat on the ground. "I ain't gonna live and die without a black boy." Kelvin Owens stepped closer like a predator. "And I don't need some Mexican thug watching me." Sean stepped between them without hesitation. "Perfect. Then you guys fight. Willie, you're the quarterback. Kelvin, you're the catcher. Kelvin's gonna run, and Willie's gonna throw the ball to him." "I'm not throwing it to him." Willie shook his head defiantly. "And I'm not catching it from him." Kelvin crossed his arms. Sean sneered. "Then you're both on the bench. No participation, no chance to prove you're not a loser." The word loser was like a slap in the face. Malcolm Moore stood on the sidelines, watching every move. "Sean," he whispered, "they're going to kill each other out there." But something magical happened. Willie, his face twisted in anger, picked up the ball. Kelvin, after a moment of struggle, ran back to his position. "Hut, hut!" Willie yelled. Kelvin ran after his ball. Willie threw the ball, but it flew out and hit Kelvin in the head. "You throw like a girl!" Kelvin roared. "You run like a turtle!" Willie replied. Sean blew the whistle. "Again! One more time!" They tried again. And again. Under the hot California sun, the boys began to learn to work together instead of against each other. Not because they liked each other, but because they hated losing more than they hated their enemies. Junior Polita, a 17-year-old Samoan with a body as big as a mountain, initially stood on the sidelines. "I don't need a football," he declared. "I can protect myself." "But can you protect your teammates?" Sean asked, and that question changed everything. The first week, they couldn't complete a pass without arguing. The second week, Willie and Kelvin were still arguing over every play. But by the third week, things started to change. During a practice, Willie was tackled and knocked down. Kelvin was the first to come to him, not out of friendship, but because Willie was the quarterback. "Thanks," Willie whispered. "Don't think I like you." Kelvin replied. "I just need you to be healthy so you can throw the ball right." It was the first crack in the wall of hatred that had separated them. Their first game came as a nightmare. The opposing team was from a private prep school, boys with shiny new uniforms and equipment that cost more than most Mustangs' families earned in a month. The Mustangs lost 42-0 in a defeat so complete it was almost humiliating. On the bus ride back, silence reigned. Willie sat with his head in his hands, his number 7 jersey smeared with mud. Kelvin stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "We're a joke," Junior muttered. "They'll probably go home laughing at us." Sean turned from the driver's seat. "Did you know Michael Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team? Did you know Tom Brady was the 199th overall pick? Losing doesn't make you a loser. Giving up makes you a loser." That night, Sean showed them the video of their loss. The boys sat in uncomfortable silence, reviewing every mistake, every missed opportunity. "Look," Sean pointed at the screen. "Willie, you had 3 seconds to shoot and you panicked. Kelvin, you ran the right way but you didn't look back. Carlos, you could have stopped that defender if you had lowered your shoulders." When the projector turned off, Willie slowly stood up. "Coach, we want to practice more. We don't want to be embarrassed like this anymore." The words were an oath, a promise to themselves that they would become more than the kids thrown away by society. 3 months after their humiliating 42-0 defeat, the Mustangs were no longer the lost boys stumbling around in borrowed uniforms. They had transformed into something that resembled an actual football team, a group of young men who had learned to channel their rage and pain into something productive instead of destructive. The change was visible not just in their play, but in how they carried themselves, how they looked at each other, how they faced the world that had written them off. Sean stood on the sideline, wearing a black windbreaker with the Mustang's logo emblazoned on the chest, a wild Mustang rearing up in defiance that perfectly captured the spirit of his team. Malcolm stood beside him holding the play chart, his face showing a pride that couldn't be hidden behind professional composure. They were preparing for their 5th game of the season, and the transformation they had witnessed was nothing short of miraculous. "Mustangs, we're facing Liberty High today," Sean called out to his players, who had gathered around him in a tight circle. "They've won 4 games straight, they're undefeated, and they think we're just another easy victory." His voice carried the confidence of a general who had trained his soldiers well and was ready to send them into battle. Willie Weathers, now wearing the captain's armband with his number 7 jersey, stood in front of the team formation. His face had changed dramatically over the past months. The street hardness was still there, but now it was tempered with the confidence of a leader who had earned his position through dedication rather than intimidation. He had learned to channel his survival instincts into leadership skills that inspired rather than threatened. "Listen up, brothers," Willie said, and the word brothers carried weight that would have been impossible months earlier. "They think we're just a bunch of criminals who got lucky. They're wrong. We're Mustangs, and today we show them what that means." His voice had lost the edge of constant anger and gained something far more powerful, the authority of someone who had earned respect through sweat and sacrifice. Kelvin Owens, now wearing the vice-captain patch on his number 15 jersey, nodded in agreement. The relationship between him and Willie had evolved from hatred to respect to something that resembled brotherhood. They had learned to see past skin color to something deeper, something that connected them as human beings who had survived similar hells and were fighting for similar dreams. Junior Palaita, at 250 pounds of pure muscle, wearing number 55, had become the most feared defensive tackle in their division. "They're going to learn what it feels like to get bulldozed," he said with a grin that was half humor and half promise. Junior had discovered that his size and strength, which had once been tools of destruction, could be weapons of protection for his teammates. The game began like a clash between two different worlds. Liberty High took the field with their pristine white uniforms and the confidence of boys who had never known real failure. Their supporters filled half the stadium, cheering with the entitled enthusiasm of people who expected victory as their birthright. The Mustangs took the field in their slightly worn jerseys, but their eyes burned with a fire that Liberty couldn't understand or replicate. The first quarter belonged to Liberty, who scored a touchdown that sent their crowd into celebration mode. From the stands, someone yelled, "Go back to prison, criminals!" The insult hung in the air like poison, designed to break their spirit and confirm every negative stereotype society held about them. Willie gathered his team in the huddle, looking each player in the eye with the intensity of someone who understood what was really at stake. "They want us angry. Don't give them that satisfaction. We're smart, we're disciplined, we're a team." His words carried the wisdom of someone who had learned to transform rage into fuel for something greater. The next play was poetry in motion. Willie faked the handoff to Carlos with precision that would have made professional quarterbacks jealous, then threw a perfect spiral to Kelvin in the corner of the end zone. The ball seemed to hang in the air forever before settling into Kelvin's hands like it belonged there. Touchdown. Mustangs. After scoring, Kelvin didn't dance or celebrate or show off for the cameras. Instead, he ran straight to Willie and embraced his quarterback with genuine emotion. "Perfect throw, hermano," he said, using the Spanish word for brother. Coming from a black teenager to a Latino teammate, that single word represented a victory more important than any touchdown could ever be. Sean stood on the sideline with tears streaming down his face, watching his boys celebrate not as individuals seeking glory, but as a team that had fought together and succeeded together. Malcolm put his hand on Sean's shoulder, both men understanding that they were witnessing something special, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The game continued like an epic battle between two different philosophies. Liberty High had better technique, superior equipment, and the support of a crowd that had never doubted their right to success. But the Mustangs had something Liberty couldn't buy or train for. They knew what it meant to fight for survival, and they had learned to fight for each other instead of against the world. In the second half, Junior Palaita sacked Liberty's quarterback 3 consecutive times, each tackle delivered with precision rather than malice. After each sack, he helped his opponent up and said, "Good try, brother." When Carlos asked why he didn't trash talk like other players, Junior's response revealed the depth of his growth. "Trash talk is for weak people. Strong people let their actions speak." The fourth quarter arrived with the score tied 21-21, and the Mustangs had the ball with 2 minutes remaining on the clock. Willie looked around the huddle at faces covered in sweat and dirt, but showing no signs of surrender. These were the same boys who 6 months earlier had been trying to kill each other in the detention center yard. "This is our moment," Willie said, his voice steady despite the pressure that would have crushed most teenagers. "Not for glory, not to prove anything to anyone else, but because we're brothers and we don't let each other down." The huddle broke with a unity that would have been impossible to imagine when their journey began. The final play was a thing of beauty that would be talked about for years to come. Willie rolled out to the right, buying time as Kelvin ran a post pattern that split 2 defenders. The ball flew through the air carrying the hopes and dreams of boys who had been told they would never amount to anything. Kelvin caught it in the end zone as time expired, and the Mustangs won 28-21. After the game, Willie was allowed to call his mother, Maria Weathers, who cried when she heard her son's voice carrying joy instead of anger for the first time in years. "Mijo, I watched the game on television. I'm so proud of you." She sobbed into the phone, her words carrying the relief of a mother who had feared she might lose her son forever. "Mama," Willie replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going to disappoint you anymore. I promise." It was a promise that carried the weight of transformation, the vow of a boy who had learned to see himself as someone worth saving. Kelvin made his own phone call, not to family who had given up on him long ago, but to Sean. "Coach, can I ask you something?" His voice carried a vulnerability that few people had ever heard from him. "What's on your mind, Kelvin?" Sean replied, recognizing the importance of the moment. "Tommy Jackson, the guy who shot my brother, just got out of prison. My old gang wants me to get revenge when I'm released." The words hung between them like a bridge that could either lead to salvation or destruction. Sean was quiet for a long moment, understanding that his next words could determine the trajectory of a young man's entire life. "What do you want to do?" he asked, knowing that the decision had to come from Kelvin's heart rather than external pressure. "Before I wouldn't have hesitated, but now I don't want to disappoint the team. I don't want to disappoint you. Most importantly, I don't want to disappoint myself." Kelvin's words revealed a young man who had learned to value something more than revenge, the possibility of a future worth living. That night in the dormitory, Willie and Kelvin lay on beds side by side, talking instead of planning ways to hurt each other as they had 6 months earlier. The conversation that followed would have been impossible at the beginning of their journey, but now it felt as natural as breathing. "Do you think we'll make it?" Willie asked, staring at the ceiling where someone had scratched "Hope Dies Here" years before. "Make it how?" Kelvin replied, though he understood exactly what his teammate meant. "I mean, get out of here and not come back. Actually build something instead of just tearing things down." Willie's question carried the weight of every dream he had been afraid to admit, every hope he had been taught to abandon. Kelvin thought for a long time before answering, his words carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned to see beyond his immediate circumstances. "I don't know about the future, but I know I don't want to disappoint the people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The Mustangs won their next game, then another after that. Local media began paying attention, not because they were winning, but because of the story behind the victories. A group of society's throwaway kids, proving that redemption was possible if someone was willing to believe in it and fight for it. As their success grew, so did the threats from the outside world. Sean received a warning that made his blood run cold. Several gangs were not happy about Willie and Kelvin's betrayal of old loyalties. The boys who had learned to fight together on the football field might soon have to fight together for their lives. The state championship stadium was packed with 15,000 people, but Sean Porter only cared about 22 boys sitting in the locker room. The Mustangs sat quietly, wearing jerseys that had transformed from symbols of society's failures into badges of hope and possibility. Their uniforms might have been older and less fancy than their opponents, but they wore them with a pride that money couldn't buy. 1 year ago you were kids that society had given up on, Sean said, standing before them in the formal suit he had chosen for this momentous occasion instead of his usual coaching polo. Today, you're young men that all of California is watching, not because you're perfect, but because you've proven that change is possible when people refuse to accept defeat. Willie Weathers, the captain wearing his number 7 jersey like armor, stood up to address his teammates. His face showed none of the anger and hopelessness that had defined him when he first arrived at Kilpatrick. Instead, his features displayed the confidence and determination of someone who had learned to channel his pain into purpose. "Listen, brothers," Willie said, his Latino accent softer now, seasoned with respect rather than hatred. "The team we're facing today is strong, but they don't have what we have. They don't know how to fight just to survive. They don't know what it means to depend on each other when everything else fails." His words carried the weight of shared experience, battles fought together both on and off the football field. Kelvin Owens, the vice-captain in his number 15 jersey, nodded in agreement. "Win or lose, we've already proven something important. We're not just statistics on some social worker's report. We're human beings who deserve respect." The transformation in Kelvin was perhaps the most remarkable of all, from a young man consumed by hatred to one powered by hope and brotherhood. The game that followed was nothing short of epic. Their opponents, the Barrington Eagles, had won the state championship 3 consecutive years, with a recruiting budget 50 times larger than what the Mustangs could dream of, and facilities that made Kilpatrick look like a third-world prison. Everything about the Eagles screamed privilege and opportunity, while everything about the Mustangs screamed second chances and determination. The first quarter belonged to the Eagles, who scored 2 touchdowns with the efficiency of a machine built for victory. The Mustangs' supporters, mostly families of the players and staff from Kilpatrick, continued cheering loudly despite the early deficit. Among them sat Maria Weathers, Willie's mother, who was genuinely smiling for the first time in 3 years, her face glowing with pride that had nothing to do with the score on the scoreboard. The second quarter marked the beginning of the Mustangs' comeback, a rally that would be remembered for years to come. Willie threw a perfect touchdown pass to Kelvin, the ball spinning through the air like a promise being kept. Junior Paleta blocked an Eagles punt, creating a safety that had the crowd on their feet. Carlos Mendez intercepted a pass and returned it for a touchdown that brought the Mustangs within striking distance. At halftime, with the Eagles leading 21-16, Sean made a decision that revealed his faith in his players' growth. Instead of delivering a traditional pep talk, he stepped back and let his boys talk to each other, trusting that they had learned to be their own source of motivation and strength. "I don't care about winning or losing anymore," Junior said, unwrapping tape from his injured wrist with careful precision. 6 months ago, I was ready to die in a gang war that didn't mean anything. Now I have dreams about college, about a future I never thought was possible. His words revealed the depth of transformation that football had made possible. "Same here," Carlos added, his voice filled with emotion that would have embarrassed him months earlier. "I've been accepted to junior college. They're offering me an academic scholarship based on my grades and my essay about second chances." The boy who had entered Kilpatrick, convinced he was worthless, had discovered his own value through teamwork and dedication. Willie looked around the locker room at faces that had become more than teammates. They had become family. "Regardless of what happens in the next 30 minutes, we've already won. We've beaten a system that said we were hopeless, and we've proven that throwaway kids can become leaders." The second half was a roller coaster of emotions that tested everyone's heart. The Eagles scored another touchdown, but the Mustangs answered back immediately. Every play felt like it carried the weight of their entire journey. Every yard gained was a victory over people who had written them off. Every tackle was a statement that they would not go down without a fight. When the final whistle blew, The scoreboard read, Eagles 28, Mustangs 24. The Mustangs had lost the championship, but something extraordinary happened in the moments that followed. Eagles players ran across the field to shake hands, many of them with tears in their eyes that had nothing to do with their victory. "You guys are the real champions," the Eagles captain told Willie, his voice filled with genuine respect. "We had everything handed to us. You had nothing, and you almost beat us anyway. That takes more courage than any of us will ever have." The words carried more weight than any trophy could ever hold. The crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. Eagles fans and Mustangs supporters alike applauded not for a victory, but for a transformation they had witnessed, a story of redemption that transcended the boundaries of sports and touched something deeper in the human spirit. Media swarmed around Sean after the game, microphones thrust toward his face like weapons seeking quotes. "Coach Porter, how do you feel about the loss?" asked a reporter who clearly didn't understand what she was really asking. Sean looked at his players, who were hugging family members and friends who had believed in them when belief seemed impossible. "We didn't lose today. We won something more important than any trophy could ever represent. We won back our humanity, and we proved that society's throwaway kids can become society's leaders if someone is willing to believe in them." 6 months after the state championship, Sean stood in his office looking through the window at the football field where a new season was beginning with fresh faces and new stories of hope waiting to be written. The statistics on his wall told a story that administrators across the country were studying with amazement and disbelief. Willie Weathers had graduated from junior college with an associate degree in business administration. He was working as a youth counselor in a community center in East Los Angeles, helping at-risk kids find alternatives to gang life. His transformation from gang member to community leader was complete, inspiring other young men to believe in their own potential for change. Kelvin Owens had earned a full scholarship to State University, where he was majoring in social work with plans to work with juvenile offenders. He returned to Kilpatrick every month to speak with new inmates about second chances and the power of choosing hope over hatred. His presence alone was proof that transformation was possible. Junior Palaita had become a successful mechanic and married his high school sweetheart, building the stable family life he had never experienced as a child. Carlos Mendez was studying to become a teacher, planning to work in underserved communities where kids needed someone who understood their struggles. Each success story was a victory over a system that had predicted only failure. Most importantly, the recidivism rate for Mustangs players was 15%, compared to the 75% average for the juvenile justice system. Numbers that had once represented failure now told a story of hope and possibility that was spreading across the country. Malcolm Moore entered the office carrying a stack of papers that represented new hope and new challenges. "Sean, we have 23 kids signed up for this season," he reported, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who had seen miracles happen and knew they could happen again. "What are their backgrounds?" Sean asked, though he already knew the answer would be familiar. "Same stories we always hear. Gang violence, drug dealing, assault charges, society's rejects, according to the newspapers." Malcolm's words carried no judgment, only the recognition that every child deserved a chance to rewrite their story. Sean picked up his whistle and walked toward the door, ready to begin another season of transformation. "Perfect. Let's go turn some more rejects into champions." His words carried the confidence of someone who had seen the impossible happen and knew it could happen again. As he stepped onto the field, 23 young faces looked at him with the same mixture of defiance, hope, and curiosity that he had seen in previous groups. They wore the standard orange inmate uniforms, but Sean saw potential hiding beneath those clothes, waiting for someone to believe in it and nurture it into something beautiful. "Welcome to Mustangs football," Sean said, blowing his whistle to call them together. "I'm not here to promise you an easy road. I'm not here to promise you'll win every game, but I promise you this. If you commit to this team will commit to you. If you're willing to fight for something bigger than yourself, you'll discover that you're bigger than anything that's ever happened to you. One boy, probably 16 years old, African American with scars on his face that told stories too painful for someone his age, raised his hand with obvious skepticism. What if we don't want to change? What if we like who we are? Sean smiled, recognizing the challenge and the pain behind it. Then you'll be perfect for this team, because changing isn't about wanting it at first. It's about finding something worth fighting for, something that makes you want to become the person you were meant to be all along. As practice began, Sean noticed a familiar figure in the stands. Jerome Washington's mother, the woman whose son had died shortly after release from Kilpatrick. She held a sign that made his eyes water. "Thank you for giving hope back to the hopeless." Her presence was a reminder that their work was about more than football, more than individual transformation. It was about healing communities and breaking cycles of violence that had destroyed too many families. Sean realized that this wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a movement. The Mustangs had proven that transformation was possible, and now other institutions across the country wanted to replicate their program. Phone calls came daily from detention centers, prisons, and community organizations seeking guidance on how to create their own versions of hope. The legacy of the Mustangs wasn't measured in trophies or championship rings. Their legacy lived in the proof that society's throwaway children could become society's leaders if someone was willing to bet on them when nobody else would. It lived in every gang member who chose education over violence, every teenager who chose hope over hatred, every family that was healed instead of broken. As the warm California sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, the sounds of whistles and cheering voices carried a message of hope across the dry landscape of Kilpatrick. It was a message that redemption wasn't a privilege reserved for the few, but a birthright available to all who were willing to fight for it. In that moment, Sean understood that they had accomplished something more important than winning games or changing individual lives. They had proven that the human spirit, no matter how broken or damaged, could be repaired and rebuilt into something stronger than it had ever been before. They had shown that when society discards its children, those children can choose to prove society wrong. The Mustangs had turned a game into a battle for their lives, and in winning that battle, they had given hope to countless others who were fighting similar wars. Their story would continue, written in the lives of every young person who chose transformation over destruction, hope over hatred, and brotherhood over division.